Okay, in Module D, the final module in the Chapter 5 on learning, we're going to talk about cognitive learning. And this part we've talked about classical and operant conditioning, which relies on our ability to form associations. And the interesting thing about uh, classical and operant conditioning is that it doesn't really take into account our ability to think and problem solve. It doesn't look at what goes on within our mind as we are trying to learn or observe a new behavior. So this is where cognitive learning comes in. Cognitive learning theorists want to look beyond just those reflex learning things or the simple things or the learning by associating the consequences. They want to understand how we learn by observing others, by observing and imitating, if you will, that behavior. Because think about it. You may be, when you were younger, you may have watched your brother or sister get punished for something that they did. And you may have seen the behavior and thought, oh, I don't want to get the same kind of punishment. I don't want to get grounded, or I don't want to get slapped, spanked, whatever it was that you saw, observed. And so you learned yourself to avoid that particular behavior so that you could avoid that consequence. This is kind of what cognitive learning is. You're thinking by observing what's happening. Let's talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. Cognitive learning can be useful for many different things, but basically it is when we learn through thinking and problem solving. We try to look at something as simple as, like, say, a recipe, as shown in this picture, and we form some mental representation of what we think it should look like. You know, we look at a picture too, but we kind of get an idea that this is what we should do and in this order. So we think it through before we actually do it. We think through the steps. Do I have all the ingredients that are needed? Do I have the tools? Do I have whatever it takes to do what it is I want to get done? So then cognitive learning is a little bit more complex in the sense that we have to think, use our past experience, solve a problem, try to remember how something worked for us in the past, that when we did it, and form some kind of representation of what we hope it will look like, or we hope it will become through our efforts, through our planning, and so forth. The other part of cognitive learning, though, is observational learning. This is when we model somebody else's behavior. So let's go with a very Canadian pastime, sport, and that is hockey. Most Canadians have either watched, played, been involved in some way in hockey, especially if you were born in Canada and that's something that you were exposed to from a very early age in your life. So how do we learn to skate? Well, some of you may recall having a chair that you pushed around a frozen rink in the backyard. Some of you may have remembered having some kind of frame that you used at a local arena that you used to sort of push around to help you stay steady as you were trying to skate. But it's not just the skating part that's important for hockey. It's being able to skate and then handle a puck and then, you know, get goals or stop goals if you happen to be the goaltender. And so how do you decide what you're going to do? Your coach may reinforce it and show you some steps and give you some advice. They may model the behavior that you want to copy or engage in. But you may also have watched hockey games on television. So for instance, you may have a favorite NHL hockey player that you observe and think, okay, this is how he has done this. This is what he did to get all those goals or to handle the puck across that much ice and so forth. And so by watching these games, you get an idea of how to stick handle, for instance, and how to do a slap shot or how to do a wrist shot or whatever the case may be. You learn the techniques by watching others, and then you try to emulate them. This watching others is called observational learning because you're modeling the behavior. They stand in as a model. That person, your favorite hockey player, let's say, stands in as a model of how you should handle the puck so that you can get it from one end of the rink to the other and score a goal. Let's look at this in a little bit more. How do we get this information? What do we do? Well, cognitive learning relies on two important principles. First of all, how relevant is this to my daily life? Is this something that I might find useful? Do I want to learn to handle a puck like some NHL hockey player, for instance, if we're talking about learning hockey skills? Or do I want to learn how to bake a cake, as if we look at the example that was illustrated in the last slide? So are you interested enough in it? So if you are, then you will observe, you'll watch, the first time, we'll go to the cake baking exercise. First time you may have helped your mother bake a cake. She may have allowed you to stir the batter. She didn't trust you with cracking the eggs because she thought maybe you'd crack it all over the countertop and that would make more of a mess to clean up. But she maybe gave you the opportunity to stir the batter, or she may have gave you the opportunity to put a measuring cup of water or other liquids into the bowl. So you're learning because you see other people doing it, and you eventually start getting involved yourself in doing that particular activity. So you have to form that mental association. If I do this, what will happen? How will this affect this? How will, if going back to the cake example, how will adding coconut, say, change the flavor? Or how will adding raisins change the banana bread to a different texture or a different flavor? So you start to look at those mental associations. Maybe you remember seeing your mother add raisins or nuts or what have you to something, and you think, okay, well, I'm going to try it too and see if it comes out the same. And if it doesn't come out the same, you sort of think, okay, maybe I need to put less of or more of, whatever the case may be. So let's look a little bit deeper at social cognitive theory. This is a theory that was put forward by a man named Albert Bandura. And what he did was he conducted a series of experiments to see if children would imitate aggressive behavior that they had observed, either through a live model or through a filmed version of this model. So the model was an adult. In this case, in the picture that I have here, it's a woman who is engaging in activity with a blow-up doll that is quite aggressive. She's hitting it, she's throwing it, she's kicking it in various frames. And what Bandura wanted to know is, how would children behave? Would they do the same things? Would they be worse? Would they be the same? Would they be less aggressive? Would they not? Would they play with it in their own way? And what he did was he had three groups. One group who was exposed to a live model, one group who was exposed to a filmed version, and one group who was not exposed to any, either live or filmed. And then they gave the child an opportunity to play with the same toy that they either saw in the film or that they saw the live model engaging in activities with. And the control group got the toy as well, but they didn't have any model of how to play with it. So what did he find? He found that the most aggressive children were the children who had watched a filmed model. Why? Well, it's basically down to four important pieces, four important steps that relate to this behavior. The first one is that the children were sitting there watching with interest and attention to this model. They they were mesmerized, so to speak, by the way this adult was engaging in activity with a toy. They took that information, they retained it when they were given the opportunity to play with the same toy that they saw the adult playing with. So they were motivated, if you will, to reproduce the activity and engage in a negative way. The children who had not seen any live model or televised model were less aggressive in their interactions with the blow-up doll. That's not to say that they weren't aggressive, but they were much, much less aggressive than are the children depicted in this picture, where they are using objects actually to hit and knock over the doll, the toy. Now, is this only useful for aggressive behavior? No, absolutely not. We can model pro-social or good behaviors by observing other people. So a parent can teach their child to be generous, for instance, by suggesting that, here's some toys that you don't play with anymore. Why don't we give them to a charity where a child could use them and get some enjoyment out of them? That's teaching pro-social good behavior by observing, especially if the parent is also saying, here, I'm going to donate some of my old clothes or items that I'm no longer using so that somebody else can get use out of them that is maybe less fortunate than we are. So social cognitive learning then really relies on our ability to pay attention, to be motivated enough to want to engage in the same behavior and reproduce that particular behavior. Okay, so that reaches the end of the chapter on learning. In the next chapter, we're going to be talking about memory.